Yes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to podcast number 2. We're doing this just after the first podcast, so we're all fresh and ready to talk some more RTS stuff. This is kind of relevant to what we were discussing last time. Actually, I need to change the text. It still says Game Length and Company of Heroes 2. Whoops. That's fine. I'll just remove that for now and we'll proceed. Basically, what we want to talk about, what I want to talk about at least, is creating flow and interaction between players in RTS games. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that, VPs being one of the most obvious ways of doing that. So something that VPs do is it's a way of creating contention in a very direct way, because it's, you know, if you don't get the VPs, you lose the game. And I feel like some other RTS games can do it a little bit more discreetly, a little bit more subtly, and I think Tenchi can really expand upon this in StarCraft. StarCraft has no like win conditions that enforce interaction, but yet there's so many ways that dictate players interacting and fighting with each other. And a lot of it is to do with scouting, in terms of wanting to see what your opponent has in terms of tech. You have mechanics such as creep, where you want to get as much mobility as possible for Zerg, but then as the opponents, you want to deny that. So maybe, potentially, if you want to just kind of elaborate upon some of the ways that StarCraft 2 creates player interaction in a very like natural way.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm glad that we have that as our starting point for this. That's like, for me, one of the things that I think is like really well done by StarCraft, and it's the same thing in Brood War, in the first StarCraft game, where there are so many incentives for interaction, because not only the first thing I have to consider is, of course, bases. Previously, you could stick around on like one base for a little longer, and that was a little bit more straightforward. Like, okay, I'm going to attack my opponent, but you necessarily didn't have to. You could just sit back, but then he'd expand, and then he'd have an economical advantage, and that, you know, again, you'll always. Let me back a little bit. In StarCraft, you can sort of say that you have this valve, right, and the pressure is always rising as time goes on, because as time goes on, time, I think, is a very underrated and the sort of hidden third resource in StarCraft, because as time progresses, then you have to assume that there is progression being made, like, on both sides of things. Like, my opponent is expanding, he's getting upgrades, he's being greedy and teching towards a specific unit so he can like improve upon his composition, and all of this like leads into, it forces you to do one or two things. Like, you have to scout, and then he has to deny the scout, and if I get the scout, then I can react, which means that I can, you know, safely expand, or I'll have to continuously play like safely. Or there's just so many things in StarCraft 2 that are very important, in the small, like, on the small scale of things, but then that easily like expands, and like overarcs into the whole grand strategy of things, especially scouting then. But yeah, I suck at being concise. I need
That's
to
okay.
practice that. Feels bad, man. Oh well.
All right,
I don't
Hans.
know if I don't even think I made a point.
No, you did. You did. Yeah, there's a
Everything
lot
you
of
said definitely made sense.
there's a lot of facets of StarCraft that create player interaction. Hans, do you have anything to add about this? I think Company of Heroes is something that we were very critical of in the last podcast, but I think in a lot of areas, Company of Heroes actually does this brilliantly. VPs aside, there's a lot of mechanics that encourage players to fight over the map for map control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You know, cutoffs, you know, the fuel and munition resources, all these important points that you want to go, and even houses. When we're talking about flow, I would like, you know, Cairo doesn't have resource sharing. I don't know about StarCraft. Does it have resource sharing?
Yes.
And
Yes,
unit
it does.
sharing as well.
And unit sharing as well. That might be nice. However, that might be slightly overpowered with unit sharing if you have a different factions units together. But I'm thinking about other things that you can do as well in Company Heroes 2, is like dropping weapons for teammates. You could do, for instance, the British half track can drop a Bren for like a penal battalion of your Soviet teammate. That's a nice you know, interaction between friends. So you got those kinds of those buffs, and also synergy as well. I find with other units. they they do very well. For instance, you can have a cloak sniper going forward as the British, which would spot for maybe Calliope barrages, and from a US player. So yeah, there's lots of ways which company heroes to definitely shines, because if you're playing like for a game like StarCraft, you only got one faction, right? As a team, you're either Protoss. I
No, but
mean,
as a team, like you can play like an insane combo is playing Zerg Protoss, where I go for fungal growth and then the
Yeah.
Protoss land Storm, or force fields and then I roll banelings into you. It's in 2v2, it's very very different. 2v2 isn't really like a serious thing in StarCraft 2 either. So
Yeah, the balance is so far off; it doesn't even resemble 1v1.
yeah,
It's actually really interesting why team games are so bad in StarCraft. But anyway, Magpie, if you want to talk about Deserts of Karak, in terms of, I know I offended you by saying that 2v2s are bad in StarCraft, but they are though.
no, they are
Hashtag
their
2v2
shit.
for life.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add about flow, about ways to encourage interaction between players in any RTS game?
Well, I mean, we're kind of coming at this from like a team point of view at the moment, and I have to say, like, 2v2 plus in Homeworld Desert of Karak is not really something that I've delved into very often. All I would say is it just seems to be like, I don't know, pretty good fun, but I haven't played enough to really be able to make any meaningful comments on it. As far as interactions go, though, I think because of the units in Deserts of Karak are designed to be basically OP if you get them in the right circumstance. And I think if you have two players working together to do that, you can have one player doing your scouting whilst the other player's like blazing down artillery or something like that. You can come up with a lot of really potent stuff. And a friend and I, when the game released, we did play a ton of 2v2. In fact, we even played a few games against the devs. And yeah, it was some of the most intense, like, cooperative RTS action I've ever played. But I don't think that's specifically due to any mechanisms. I just think it's because it's just like a tight RTS and the engine is solid.
I think one of the great ways that Company of Heroes 2 does it, obviously, like, resources are really easy. It's really easy to go. You have to compete over resources. Pretty much every RTS game, you have to compete over resources. But Company of Heroes 2 does a bit more than that. What it does that I think is really brilliant is the way that cover and garrisons work. Is a lot of times you're fighting over wanting to hold the most valuable garrison, or if you get control of this portion of the map, it means that you're going to be sitting behind heavy cover, and then your opponent has to attack you because they have to attack you, and you're behind heavy cover, so they will lose. So you want to try and get the good cover positions, to get the good garrison positions, and then if your opponent has that, you want to try and avoid that. Something as well that Tenchi didn't mention about StarCraft, which I think is actually really, really fascinating in terms of organically creating interaction to do with the faction design that's not even related to resources at all, is the way that drones work. Droning in StarCraft is that you build your workers, your resource collectors, from the same, I guess, prerequisite is of which you build military units. Zerglings, Hydras, they all require lava to transform into either drones or Zerglings. So what that does is it incentivizes your opponent, a Protoss, Terran, Zerg, whatever it is, to attack you very aggressively. Because if the Zerg is constantly having to build more and more Zerglings, build more base defenses, it's detracting away from the amount of economy they can produce, not just directly in terms of the raw mineral value, but also in terms of you're bottlenecking the lava that can transform into drones.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought it up. I completely forgot about that. That's like another really good thing about, like, not only does Protoss have to deny creep, or like anyone in all matchups actually, like, even in the mirrors, even in ZVZ, going for like a sharking is what it's called when you're moving out aggressively on the map to just like fake aggression. That too can like be really impactful on the not only on the length of the game, but like the whole flow of the game, because it can trigger the Zerg to look back and like, okay, now I have a bunch of roaches and lings, but I don't really have an economy. I have 45 drones, and I'm up against a 60 SCV Terran, so I have to all in him. So like things like that can definitely impact the pace of the game significantly.
I think the a Command and Conquer game that does harassment very well is is Red Alert 3, because in Red Alert 3, I mean, and this is kind of the same with 0 Hour, but I feel like Red Alert 3 does it even better, is you have the same sort of situation when you're fighting over the garrisons, which are very important. You're fighting over oil derricks. Oil derricks are a big part of that game. You're potentially harassing your opponent's harvesters. You're potentially denying base expansions. So I feel like the more ways that you can create interaction without just having the one thing in terms of like, this is the only way you interact, that's what's really interesting, especially when you have games that have a lot of tech and a lot of scouting. Because when you have scouting, it means you have counter scouting. And the reason why scouting is such a big part of StarCraft is because scouting, the prerequisites for units are very identifiable. If your opponent is going for Dark Templars, they require the Dark Shrine. If they're going for battle cruisers, they're going to be building a fusion core. So that's something that it's really, really obvious, and you can see that. Whereas if you look at some other games, just say Company Heroes, for example, if your opponent has a tank depot, you don't know if they're building a Sherman or if they're going to build a Jackson or a Pershing, whatever it is. You can't really tell what they're doing by scouting. Scouting isn't a part of Company of Heroes.
I think that's a bit of a shame, to be honest, because I feel that there could be like a lot of interesting things that you could do with the game potentially. Like, I don't know, if you had some like sort of production animations, so you can see what they're building if you manage to penetrate their base. But then again, we're back at this issue with like base defense, and I think that if we removed base defense structures and then I don't know, change something with how the production looks, then then all of a sudden scouting would probably become like a really big part of the game, because then I can run in with a 222 very quickly and just see, oh shit, he's getting a T-34-85 or something like that, and then
you know what you could do in Vico was when, for instance, if you had a M8 out, you could drop an M8 mine out the front of a
God.
Creek's barracks.
Yeah.
And as the vehicle comes out, like a pack gun, it would immediately die. Being able to really punish your opponent like that was really something awesome that you could do in the game. And I'd like to be able to do that again for Co. But in the past you weren't able to do that, but now units now respawn will spawn out of buildings, unlike coming off the map how tanks do. So you could probably mine the off-map spawning entrances if possible, but a lot of them just come from behind the HQ a lot of the time, which can be a pain.
Magpie, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, the big offenders for me are still the massive amount of HP that the base building has and the base defenses. And actually, when Tenchi was mentioning the base defenses just now, I suddenly had this idea. What if we made them like garrisonable structures? So if you built an MG42 and put it in there, you could defend your base like pretty well. But you'd have to actually do that, like you just kind of started with a bunker that was garrisonable or something.
Ooh, yeah,
That's interesting.
Another like interesting idea. Like both you and Callum.
Is scouting a part of Deserts of Karak?
Absolutely. Really,
How?
it's like one of the finer points of balance. You need to see, because the research tree is, again, it's sort of similar to a StarCraft-style research tree. So if you need to see which way your opponent is heading so that you might have a chance to have the appropriate counters in place. And it's a little bit like, say, for example, in StarCraft 2 with DTs, if you get no scout whatsoever and you're caught with your pants down and no detection and you've just dropped all your mules, you're probably going to suffer really hard. And it's the same in Deserts of Karak. If you don't scout that your opponent's transitioning into air, then all of a sudden like 3 tactical bombers show up and all of a sudden your stuff's getting bombed up and it's really bad.
How do you actually
So
scout
it's
that
big.
though?
Well, one of the cool ways that Homeworld Deserts of Karak is balanced is that the Gaussian units are all really fast, but they have slightly lower line of sight. The coalition units are all slower, but they have a longer like sight distance that they can see. So you basically need to get a unit in there. It's a bit like trying to get a Zergling or a worker in StarCraft 2. But there are some other tools as well, like the Coalition and Homeworld Deserts of Karak. They can build UAVs, which just like literally like little unmanned drones that you can flow in. They're incredibly fragile. They go down to like 1 shot from anything, but they're flying, they're fast, they're cheap. And the Gaussians have little scanners that they can put down and things like that. So scouting it's a massive. It is as important as it is in StarCraft, and it's just yet another thing they've done really well. I am being paid, by the way, just saying.
I meant like
I'm not being paid.
On the carrier, like does it show that you have air upgrades? How do you actually see bombers, or is it just physically seeing them flying in the air? Because you deploy them, don't you? So you don't
Well,
normally
the
see
carrier.
them.
So in that, yeah, but there's prerequisite tech you need before you can unlock the air tech. So you need to scout the fact that they've gone for assault ships or AAVs, which is what unlocks air units, and like that's the tell basically. Or the other tell is if they're super clever / really risky, they can research the prerequisite tech but not build any of those units, which means that they're going to be hella weak for a while because they've researched tech that they're just not using, and there's like quite a long time, so they have to research that tech and then the air tech. But if they manage to defend themselves and nobody really gets a scout, then that's like a thing that you can try and do. It's risky.
But is that a thing though? Like, is faking a thing in Deserts of Karak? Because I feel that that's something
Yes.
that, I mean,
Yes,
it just
faking
doesn't
is
happen in
massive.
Company of like it doesn't happen in Company of Heroes. Like you get the tech,
Well-
then you usually go and stick with that
Like,
tech,
the
unless
Deserts of Karak equivalent of like it has equivalents of like 6 pools, or I guess it would be 13 and like things that are that aggressive, and you can kind of like if you just like pull your units across the map at the beginning and they scout that, they've got like probably less than 90 seconds to make sure they don't die to that kind of a rush. So then you can just kind of pull them all back again, and like if they're there like furiously building basic units like equivalently Marines to try and defend themselves, you're there like, you know, getting your second base or whatever. Yeah, you can totally bluff and like try and pull a lot of things.
yeah, because I feel that is like a really important like engagement dynamic in StarCraft, where I feel it's really lacking in Company of Heroes, that you don't really have elements like that, which you know could make for some really interesting moments or like really cool moments. That's like going back through time. If I just like off the top of my head thinking about like the most memorable moments in esports, um, it is, you know, when someone has pulled off one of these like great fakes that shouldn't really work, but because the stakes are so high, they manage to pull
Yeah.
them off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think
yeah.
it'd be better if on the carrier if it actually showed like an airstrip so you can visually see that your opponent is going for air units on the carrier itself?
No, and the reason I say that is because the counters to air are so very potent. Your opponent puts a lot of resources, time, and tech into air tech, and if you have the appropriate missile defense or if you have the appropriate anti-air defense, you kill those units very, very quickly. That's not to say that they're useless, but it's like the difference between having detection for a Cloak Banshee and not having it. It's like, if you're ready for it, you can defend, you swat it away with some ease. If you're not ready for it, you're going to be scrambling your workers all over the place and trying to deal with a unit that you can't really take on. So I would say they've got it about right. Like, yeah, I think if you made it any easier, then it would mess with the balance of the way the game works and the units too much. But yeah, I think air tech is a hard one to use as an example because you don't actually see those units out until they're launched. But like other tech, you know, you can. There are other ways of scouting that tech.
What about like an armor upgrade? Like when you upgrade your LAV armor, is there physically a tell sign?
It is the exact same as in StarCraft 2. So when your opponent's units are visible, if you click on them, you can see their upgrades in the bottom of the screen. So and I like that a lot because like in StarCraft 2, it's not very skillful, but it is a player skill thing. You have to be, you know, aware of upgrades. You have to keep checking your opponent. You have to remember to click on their units and check and see which upgrades they do and don't have, if you want to know. So yeah, I think that's it's fine.
Yeah, I also want to just add, even though I don't have Karak experience, I think that not displaying all of these like very obvious things is a skill to like forces your opponent to read into what's going on. Like, okay, he has this by this specific timing, or rather, he doesn't have what I expect at this specific timing. So where have those resources been put into?
Yeah.
I feel like that there is. I mean, I don't think scouting is the right word. It's more deducing in terms. I think the classic example is trying to suss out. Does my opponent have telemines? And then you look, okay, well, he doesn't have any flamers, doesn't have LMGs, he hasn't spent any of his munitions, therefore, he must have telemines, and then you can, as a result, you can just avoid the common mining spots. So I feel like there is, to an extent, actually a fair bit of...
But it's so minuscule by comparison. Like, it doesn't really matter in the same way.
It's not game-changing. I think in StarCraft we would call what you've just described as basically game sense. You know,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
you get a feel
yeah.
for what your opponent's
Scouting
doing by
isn't the
seeing
right word
little
for it.
things and stuff like that.
Scouting is
part of-
driving
it is a
into your
part of
opponent's space.
scouting,
Yeah.
But it is a slightly different part, I think.
And it's kind of a shame because there actually is a lot of recon units. You know, you have the M3, you have the M20, you have these units that are kind of designed for recon, but recon just
Right, but there's
isn't...
not a lot for them to do.
Yeah, recon isn't a thing. And even then,
Yeah, good
you
point.
have snipers, which are also recon, but snipers are primarily manpower bleed. I feel like what would be really cool is if, you know, say snipers... they had like less sight range, but then they could toggle more sight range in exchange for their weapons, so you could use them primarily as a sight mode. Like what I think is really fun, one of the great mechanics in Company of Heroes is when you use the sniper flare or the mortar flare to get vision around. In the mod that I'm making, I've actually given the Vermac sniper an ability which replaces the incendiary, because I hate that ability. It's like a binocular toggle. It's like the focus sight from the SU-85. So he puts on these binoculars and he gets like a really long cone of vision. So you can use the sniper to actually give you a lot of sight range and a lot of recon. I feel like, I mean, Company of Heroes, it's very different because there isn't counters, if that makes sense. It's a game of soft counters, and you can't really have scouting in a game that doesn't have hard counters. I mean, there's obviously, you know, like AT guns and in tanks, but it's not like, okay, he has roaches, therefore I need marauders. You know, there's not like the hard counter. It's more scouting in Company of Heroes is more about tactics and positioning. You know, say you want to scout, and the main reason you scout in Company Heroes is for MG positioning. You want to flank your opponent's MG. You want to flank your opponent's AT guns. So it actually does have scouting in a way. It's just scouting not for tech, but scouting for engagements.
Yeah, but it still to me feels like very underwhelming in what it's actually there to achieve. Like you still. I still think StarCraft is like one of the best examples of it, because you scout for tech, you scout for your army's positioning, like all the time in late game, like or in mid game, you'll see Terrans drop scans to find where the army is, or like a scan in common positions of where the army should be standing, because then you'll see like compositions, you'll be able to like pre-position, because positioning in StarCraft 2 is at least as important as it is in Company of Heroes, I'd say.
So I think
especially in like Terran versus Terran.
I think you could say that a lot of that comes down to, in Company of Heroes, what you build is very predictable. You don't, like, half the reason you don't need to scout, not just because it's a soft counter game, but it's more just because you know your opponent is going to build a T-70, and then he's going to build an Su-76, and then he's going to call it an IS-2. So in late game as well, if you kill a King Tiger, he's going to rebuild the King Tiger. There is no doubt. There is no question. He's not gonna, like, he's definitely going to build the King Tiger again, because the King Tiger, and just any heavy tank really, any heavy tanks are just so overpowered for their cost. They're so cost efficient that you can you always know what your opponent's going to do, just because some things are just more viable than others.
Yeah, which again, you know, it stems back to the whole.
Like, Hans, do you ever like scout your opponent in Company Heroes? Is that a thing that you do?
Well, not their tech. You don't need to really. I mean, if you kind of know their tech in the first couple of seconds of the game, and you either prepare for it one way, and if it doesn't work that way, you always have like you say, a soft counter to deal with it. For instance, M3, you have Grenadiers with Panzerfaust that can take it out. So you just play a bit more conservatively if you go sniper first. But you got, you know, for late game, I'm always scouting my enemy's positions, or maybe have like a sniper and hold fire, so I can see where their, like you say, their anti-tank guns are. You know, you can use recon planes to spot enemy positions, that kind of things. That kind of be similar to like the Terran scans from StarCraft 2. But yeah, instead of, you know, for tech though, yeah, I wish there was more incentive to scout for a tech. But the fact that there's so many soft counters in the game just really doesn't make it, you know, that rewarding to scout.
Do you have any suggestions of how scouting for tech could be more necessary?
It's a good question.
I think making I think making units less viable in all situations would be like a really key thing to do. That you'd have to remove like anti-tank capabilities with a lot of the infantry in that case, because like that means that you can't, because right now in the current state of how it is, you can sort of just like, okay, even if he gets light armor, I'll just play around these buildings and sort of play CQC, because then he can't really use his vehicles. He can't use his like Stuart tank or whatever, because then I'll just Panzerfaust it, or he can't run in with his Panzer IV because I can just 80 grenade it or rifle grenade it. Or use my guardsmen infantry 80 rifles and DPs to
which is kind of the appeal of Company of Heroes, is that because it is a game of soft counters, you have a lot of creativity in terms of how you You use your units.
But I disagree. I disagree that it's a game of soft counters in a way, because you have some factions that have everything for their basic infantry, like the USF, whereas you have like the
Oh,
regular
interesting.
riflemen for the Englishmen, like for the Brits, that do nothing unless you equip them with certain weapons. Um, like it's it comes back to this like whole design philosophy thing. So there are some factions and some units that don't have what you need to deal with the threats appropriately.
Hans?
Well, I was just thinking, I just remembered, like, in Company Heroes 1, Americans could build a supply yard, right? And sometimes it was worthwhile to scout the American base to see if they'd upgraded their supply yard or not, because then you would know that they would, if they have enough fuel to go up for a tank depot, for instance. So then you could probably think, okay, he's upgraded his supply yard, so he's going to have, so therefore I know he's going to field more rifles. His rifles can be more effective, and I might be thinking, okay, now is the time. It's a great time in the game where I should build up armor so I can counter his infantry. That was a good idea. A reason for why you would scout an American opponent, for instance, and maybe get as the Wehrmacht, you'd probably scout them to see if they'd put up their what was that building called? The Kriegs? No.
Kampf Center?
Yeah, the one where you tech up.
Yeah, the
Kampf
Center, something like that.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say upgrade your supply, do you mean like you buy the upgrades from the supply, the tech things?
Yeah, because you definitely see a visual upgrade because it would expand over.
Right.
You would see, he would expect, or that kind of things like that.
I think it's something that, I mean, visual clarity is very important. I mean, we're kind of going off of our topic, but I think this is really interesting. So I ain't even mad, bro. I think visual clarity is important. Like when you see riflemen get bars. It isn't just a 20% damage boost. It is, you physically see a bar, and then furthermore, it's a very distinctive sound. You can hear the bar. Whereas, say you look at StarCraft, for once we're kind of using a bad example of StarCraft. I know Tenchi will get mad, but when you get +1 weapons, +1 defense, there is no. It's not visually intuitive. You have to click on the unit and then like look at the upgrade, and I think that's actually less interesting than having a visual tell sign, like saying like combat shield.
Though.
Well, I
was going to say
think
combat shield's a good example of one that is visual.
Yeah, that's visual, but I still think it's good though that it's not like that you have a different audio cue or that it's a visual thing, because it adds another element of skill. Like, and then again it comes down to game sense. Like, okay, with this we're at 7 minutes in the game. Does my opponent have +1 attack? Yes, no, sort of. It's.
I think it's more immersive though. When you don't have to look at the UI, when you don't have to look at the video game, when you look at the models.
Company of Heroes is a more visual game. It's more of a cinematic game than StarCraft 2. But like for me, I wasn't actually aware that there was a competitive scene for Company of Heroes until like half a year ago, to be honest. Like or a little more, but I'm like still very late to this party.
Okay, so how about sorry if I cut you off there. How about
Okay.
if you have a tier 3, if you have whatever your tier 3 is for Wehrmacht, if you're building a Ostwind, you can tell. If you're building a Panzer IV, like, you can see the Panzer IV being built. Do you think that'd be interesting? Because then you could like
Yes.
run a scout car in. Oh, he's building a Panzer IV, and then you would like get some anti-tank. I think that'd be perhaps a good idea.
I would really like that.
Oh, you are a
Yeah,
clever and handsome cookie machine.
Thank you. But what I really like, something that Company Heroes 2 does very well, is you hear the. I mean, it's scouting. It's the equivalent of scouting. Is you hear the tank coming through fog of war. It's like you know it's coming. You can preemptively retreat, and furthermore, you can hear what the engine is. You know if it's a Panzer IV, is it going to be a King Tiger? Is it going to be a Panzer II? You know the sound if you know the game well enough that you can make the decisions on. Oh, it's a Panzer II. Actually, no, I'll stay here. I'll set up my AT guns. Whereas if it's a King Tiger, you retreat.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing, because you can also, you look through the fog of war. You can. I don't know if this is a bug with the game. It probably is, but you can see like stone walls breaking, or sandbags, or twigs, or whatever, branches collapsing, and then you know where the vehicle actually is, because it's only a medium vehicle or up that can possibly do those kinds of things. So that's another element of maybe scouting or.
Yeah, I feel like Company of Heroes is a game mainly about execution and tactics. The strategy is a bit straightforward. You're basically you're building the same units every game. So that any way where you could actually add in more skill differentiators in terms of the strategy, so the players have to actually think more. That's what StarCraft 2, what Company of Heroes needs the most. And I feel like also Zero Hour is kind of the same. Zero Hour is a game all about micro, because it's heavily soft counters. The strategy is very one-sided. You just basically just spam Humvees or spam buggies if you're GLA. And in China, it's kind of different because China, you actually have a lot of different play styles. You might go for the air units. You may go for overlords, which then have their own counters. Or you may, go for a lot of battle masters, and then it's a different counter to that. So yeah, I feel like any way to make more strategic depth and more skill differentiators at a decision-making level, that's what's really fun and what RTS games should be all about.
At least competitively.
Yeah, but I think it competitively, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of casual gamers. Like being able to see a Panzer IV being built, that in no way is taking away from casual gamers. That's exactly how you want to do skill differentiators. You want to do it in ways that don't force you to, and you're not being punished, but you're at an advantage if you do.
Yeah. I mean, the Stargate it's the only structure that has like a visual cue as to what you're building in StarCraft 2.
Right? Really?
Yeah. Like you can see you can see what's phasing in.
Yeah,
like
you see like the outline, so you can see if it's like a void ray or a carrier or
an oracle.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Oh, Protoss woes, man! You throw down that scan and it's just
Well,
like, oh.
Well, but you can normally
How
just
did you
tell
see my
by
carriers coming?
context, though. Anyway, like
Say again?
you can normally tell what they're building by context in terms of, well, I have
Yeah,
7
yeah,
liberators.
yeah.
He's probably building Tempests.
Yeah, but that's
game
like
sense.
another. Yeah, exactly. Like that's the game sense thing. Like you anticipate what makes the most sense. From.
Yeah, and I think we've got that in
point
Company
of
of
view.
Heroes 2 already. Like you can expect that kind of thing, but like you say, if you could see a Panzer IV being built, it would be a little different. Like that would give you more time to use that information. But having said that, there are commanders in the game who have that built in as an ability, the radio
Oh,
intercept.
that's such a silly ability, though.
Yeah,
It's
but there
really
are so
silly.
many of these like abilities are fundamentally retarded because they just break the entire like idea of
No.
of
Actually,
the whole game.
My point is actually completely the opposite. It's like those radio
really?
intercepts, they tell you as soon as the enemy unit arrives, I believe. Not when it,
Yeah,
it's
it
when
arrives,
it arrives, not when
yeah.
it comes on the queue. Right, but still it gives you usually like 30 seconds to a minute additional warning heads up of enemy units before they enter the fight. And you know what? I can't think of a single time that's ever made a difference to me playing. Maybe once or twice when I'm like, oh, that's a weird choice. So, you hear the thing say like Ostwind has arrived or something. Like, that's a weird choice to go for an Ostwind. I guess I'll get another Zis gun, like, or something.
Well, actually, a lot of the
it
times
basically makes no difference, I think.
Oh no, I disagree entirely. A lot of the times
Really?
when I'm con spamming and I hear scout car deployed, AT grenades, and by the time the scout car is like actually firing at your conscripts,
You're
pretty much
ready.
already have AT
But
grenades.
I guess it's more impactful depending on like what stage of the game you are when you use it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, or like if you
And
hear
I
a
think if you're
Panzerwerfer coming, you don't
yeah.
blob.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's actually a really bad ability.
Yes.
And the reason, and when I say bad, I mean that can mean a lot of things. I mean bad in terms of it isn't fun, it isn't interesting, it isn't compelling. And the reason why is
Hey, that's just like the entire like the entire British faction. They're not fun at all.
You've clearly
what's
not
this
been
heresy?
having the voice files
Yeah,
turned on.
I mean you're saying this to the rank one British player here, Tenchi.
Yeah,
But
that doesn't matter. I could tell, like the top Zug in the world during Swarmhost times that his race was shit. Like.
well, allow me to
doesn't
finish
matter.
my explanation anyway, because
Yeah,
the
sorry.
reason why is because there's no interaction. Like if it was something you had to manipulate, like say it was a timed ability, you know, you had to activate it, and then it only lasted 10 seconds or whatever. So you had to time it when you think your opponent was building something, or if it only worked within like a certain range, so you had to get your conscripts near their base. Just there should be some way of actually interacting. You should have to.
Yeah.
The way I see it, when it comes to any ability in any RTS game ever, there should always be either opportunity cost, or it should require precision or timing, or
Basically, always on abilities that players have no impact on whatsoever are boring. Is your basic point, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It's just an always on. It's
And
like I have
foresight
selected
and
this, so I
preparation.
have
Yeah,
this special
and
rule.
I agree completely. I think like anything that rewards passiveness, like or not even passiveness, that's the wrong word. Anything that rewards you just doing fuck all is stupid.
like something
that's
you
what I
don't
think.
have to interact with. I think.
Yeah, like that should always be like the key thing in RTS, because otherwise you can just play a fucking browser game for all, you know, like it's the same thing.
Right. Okay. Well.
I think. Oh,
I-
yeah,
Sorry, Hans. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. I know what you're about to say is the mortar pit. You don't like the mortar pit because
I don't like anything with British emplacement design philosophy, because it's retarded, because it slows down the game. It's automatic, so you can literally be retarded and set it down and it'll do the job. Why not just give English a regular mortar? Like you were onto this, Callum. Like, why not just give all the factions all the exact same tools in terms of what they'll achieve, and like make them work in a similar fashion? Because then, if I'm mechanically sound and I understand the game well, then I can make things happen, and instead of just having things autopilot, because it's just really boring. Like, he's built a mortar pit; it's just gonna sit there now, And
Well,
then
is-
as well,
is-
like
is-
another issue is the size of the maps, because like on some maps you get a mortar pit, it covers 2 VPs.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
stretches. Like the issues in Company of Heroes are so fundamentally broken by design philosophy. So it's a much deeper rooted issue.
It's high risk, high reward thing though with the emplacements. If you go for the
sure.
immortal placement, you've got double mortars, which is better than obviously one, but then it can't move anywhere. And I would always choose.
It's very expensive as well, right? It's like
And then
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
only, and then because it just sits there, even one league will destroy that thing. And then if you try to repair it, you're very likely your repairing squad's going to get one shot by a round. Then you've lost even more manpower. So and with both wars, there are ways to counter them. I do agree that it is kind of like if you had two average players playing it, then it would be a lot easier you just to build the thing and let the placement do the work for you, kind of thing. I don't like that. I wish there was more micro. I mean, you kind of got some more micro intensive with them, where you have to get in the Bofors to then use the barrage ability, and you got to manually place that. So you've kind of got it there, but still, I would think that there would be more.
I think what
just
happens
like
is
make
roughing
it more manual fire. Like you have to always, like for the mortar pit. I wouldn't mind if you had the mortar pit if you had always had to use the barrage.
But that's a
manually.
chore. That's annoying. I don't want to have to babysit my mortar pit.
Terran macro is a chore. I can't miss a cycle
Soak
of unit
macro is
of
a
like
chore as well.
yeah, like I can't miss a cycle of production because then I die. Like, or if I have the mortar pit and I miss a couple of cycles of fire support, then that can be very impactful because I'm so caught up in the other things I'm doing.
I think with mortar
It becomes a
pits,
skill element.
I think with mortar pits, they're such a fragile example because they do fire on auto, but they also the variance is massive. Like a shell that misses is completely different to a shell that bullseyes a squad, and neither player really has any impact on that whatsoever. Like, whereas in StarCraft, it's much more predictable. You get a siege tank set up, it does X damage per shot. You can like try and decluster your units if it's firing at you, and that's kind of how it works. But with mortars, it's just like so many dice. I think that's a separate issue, to be honest.
Yeah, with mortars.
But
Well,
I kind of think though, with the emplacements,
Fair
which
enough.
is what we were like initially talking about, like I think it's fine to give the British a defensive theme and a defensive bonus, but like what if mortar pits, this is just like off the top of my head, what if mortar pits were like a little bit more like siege tanks? So they took a while before they could start firing, but once they were ready and they'd put down all their sandbags, they basically had like heavy cover no matter where you put them or something. Like you could make them feel emplacement-y but still be mobile units,
I think this is
Like,
becoming a lot more interesting now that we're not really talking about specific topics and we're just kind of ranting about whatever we want. Go on, Tenchi, sorry.
Yeah, so like I like what you're onto here, Magpie, because like let's say if you gave the English conventional mortar squads like the Wehrmacht and the Americans have now, and then you could put them together like you had an ability that construct mortar pits. So you had to specifically take two mortar squads and they'd construct a
Oh,
mortar
con
pit.
mortars.
Or you'd get an
Yes.
infantry section that would have to build
Mortar
the
cons.
sandbags for the mortar pit. Then it would be, you know, you'd have to bring
Maybe
away a
that.
squad.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be too overkill. But like, if you had the two mortars, you had the ability to combine those two into a mortar pit, which gave them extended range and like access to new munitions. But they'd be immobile. That would be the trade-off. You know, like something like that.
There you've got some interesting decisions, and you're not like pigeonholing the British player into
Yeah.
dumping a ton of their resources into a static emplacement, which is basically boring for everyone: observers,
Yeah.
casters, players. Like, you know.
Do you guys remember Imperial Guard in Dawn of War? You would actually have the heavy weapons
Yes.
team where you would walk along with what was like one person. It was so weird, and he would turn into three people in an emplacement.
Yeah, and a sandbag in place.
Yeah. But essentially, it's as you said, Magpie. You know, it's something that you can move around. It's a mobile emplacement that then packs up and can deploy. There are certainly ways to have British thematically defensive, but not in a way that is bad for gameplay. Yeah, the mortar pit is there's just so many issues with the mortar pit, and there's a lot of issues combined. I mean, the first issue that Hans brought up is you have the variance of RNG, and I feel like that's actually a pretty easy solution in terms of RNG being too punishing. And what I've done in my mod is I've made it so mortars have a maximum models damaged per squad set to 3. So it's same with how mines are currently in the live game, is they cannot damage more than 2. So
yeah, that would be a lot better.
A mortar cannot ever possibly damage more than 3 models. So you have, a squad massive clumped, the mortar shell hits, one guy will survive every time. Obviously, if you have 3 people, the squad can die. But it's so much better because it gives you more of a chance to respond. You can retreat that, you can back away from that.
Well, again, it's a risk, isn't it? You can decide to fall back because your squad's on 3 men, knowing that it could get wiped by a mortar, or you can decide to keep going, and that's power to the player. That's empowering them with decisions.
Also,
and I think that's a lot better just in every single sense. Sorry to cut you off there. Go on now.
In the mod, what I've also done is I've also done something similar for tanks. The problem with Company Heroes 2 tanks is they're very, very inconsistent. You'll have a Panzer IV, and it'll miss quite literally 10 shots in a row. And on the 11th shot, boom, there goes your rifle squad. And you're like...
Sometimes it happens.
Yeah, it happened. I mean, Axis suffer more from the 4-man squads, but the inconsistency affects everyone. So what I've done in the mod is I made it so tanks cannot damage more than 2 models at a time, but they have 20% less scatter. So it means that tanks are going to be hitting a lot more often, as Magpie goes to make a T probably. But then, you won't get those cheesy wipes.
But then you got to think, like, what about if you go for an ISU? It's got very long reload time. If you're only getting 2, why would you choose an IS2 if you could get a T-34-85 that could do the same thing? Yes, the ISU's got the range, but then you got the long.
But that's the thing. You make them different.
Well, actually, Hans, because the IS-2 has like 350 armor, it has a lot more health, it has more penetration. There are plenty of reasons to differentiate them. I mean, sure, the anti-infantry might be the same, but that's only one facet of the tank.
Yeah, I guess so.
The other thing, going back to this mortar emplacement, the other problem with the mortar emplacement is that, it shoehorns you into the static playstyle, and that wouldn't be a problem if there were alternatives. The problem with Brits is they have no alternatives to garrison clear. Is you say that there's an MG42 in a house, and then there's like another MG42 in another house. How do you deal with that? Okay, well, you can't build a mortar to flush them out because you don't have a mortar. You can't get a flamer because you don't have a flamer, and the Wasp just doesn't exist essentially. And so
it's not one shot by pack, so it's not going to be any use.
Or 2-2 even.
That's why most games I'm always forced to play a mobile assault regiment, so I have the flamethrowers and sabers. I have the landmax, which is mobile artillery, so I can take down these defensive positions. But I hate having to always choose a certain commander to just have like what my opponents already have anyway. Like the Oster has a normal mortar and they have a Panzer work that does these considerable artillery. So yeah, I would like maybe give Brits maybe the mobile mortar or something.
I think we can certainly talk about commanders. Yeah, I've done I've given Brits the mobile mortar in my mod. It's exactly right. Is commanders at least for British and for US in particular? I think commanders are more about giving you things which you need to do a specific thing, whereas as in Company Heroes 1, the commanders were more of they would synergize with a specific play style. It was very player preference. It was very oriented in terms of like, I want to play very defensive, so therefore I'll go defensive doctrine, and actually it worked with that quite well. And furthermore, it would give you really strong units to counter certain units, but it wasn't like necessary. Like in terms of, if your opponent had a Panther, you could counter it with recoilless rifle airborne, but you also had AT guns. You had an alternative as far as anti-tank is concerned. Whereas with garrison clearing for Brits, I mean, I suppose you have the base howitzer, but like that's awful, and the fact that you don't get medics then anyway.
It's really shitty when you force players down a certain path out of necessity, and there is no room for like player decision and flexibility. Like that's just like always uninteresting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like I just said, with the forcing to go mobile assault to just have mobile, indirect fire is, as Brits is, I don't like doing it. It is a very strong commander though, but I'd like to have more flexibility in the way I go about doing things.
Party on.
Yeah.
Actually, doesn't on that subject, kind of Magpie, doesn't Deserts of Karak have sub factions? How does that work?
Yeah, it does have sub-factions, and I suppose they are slightly like commanders insofar as they share, like, if you thought of all of the commanders as different sub-factions, it's like you have 90% the same units, but some of your units will be slightly different, and you might have one unit or two units that are, like, new, and you might not have access to 2 or 3 units that you're used to having. Insofar as how they're balanced and things, all of the factions always have access to all of the things that they need to play the game. So it's like they've it is similar to commanders, but they've thought it through a bit more. It's as though all of the factions already had like all of the things they need, like mortars, indirect fire, and all of this kind of stuff. And then the commanders are really just fine-tuning, like, it's like small differences, but it's like things like the special abilities on your base runner and like the specific attributes of your siege cruisers, rockets, and like the subsystems on your carrier and things. Like none of this lets you play the game in a different way, like having a mobile mortar with smoke does. But they are interesting and flavorful and well balanced. So yeah, they are actually adding a lot. I think commanders, from that point of view, I think commanders could be great. I think they could be great.
Are they a sub faction in terms of you select them in game, or do you have to select them before you spawn?
At the start, so when you're loading, it will display your precise race. So Coalition and Saban, they're the two sub factions of the sort of Coalition race, if you like.
Yeah.
And on the loading screen, it will say, today you are playing against this Saban player. These things are public and they're known. It's like choosing your race in StarCraft.
I think it's more interesting if you can choose it in game. Like I think Company Heroes 1 Commanders is really interesting compared to that. Another example that's pretty much the same as Deserts of Karak is the generals in Command and Conquer 0 Hour. Is you choose it, but you choose it in the load screen.
I think that is really interesting, and it brings you to like a whole kind of, there's like an element of chicken, like who picks first, and then there's the whole like stone paper scissors, which commanders beat each other. So there is like a whole interesting like mind game, meta game going on there, which is fun to watch in Company of Heroes 2. But I'm not sure that I'm not sure it justifies its existence, because most of the best RCSs.
In Han's example, he's always going to be going for the. I don't know the name because I'm
mobile assault.
Yeah, like you can always sort of assume that that's what he's going to get, because he's to get the fundamentals that he needs for the most basic things in the game.
That's a big problem, and I guess I'm talking in the context of a commander system that is kind of more balanced and makes sense as part of the game.
Yeah.
I don't like commanders countering other commanders though. Like I think that's really stupid. Like in terms of
there's going to be an element of that, right?
Well, but what commander in Company of Heroes 1 counted another one?
Sometimes in Company of Heroes, it can be like ridiculously
You're
hardcore.
right.
Like you'll have one guy with like super heavy call-ins, like he goes for IS-2.
And you have Pack 43, I think, is best example.
No, like he goes for something super heavy. You need to get like a Puma or something, let's say, to survive the T-70 because you've struggled to get the fuel. So you have to go to that, and you have Osttruppen and Puma, and then he has like super heavy shit coming out, and you've spent all of your fuel in the mid game, and then
I was arguing for commanders in terms of like, oh, you have IS-2, well, I have Pack 43, GG kind of thing.
Well, in Company Heroes 1, the Wehrmacht defensive commander I thought was countered by the infantry commander with off-map howitzer barrage, which destroyed the med bunker, and you could build howitzers and you could just wreck defensive emplacements and stuff.
I suppose.
So that could kind of work.
I think, yeah, if you have sufficient variety of commanders and they're all equally good, some of them are just naturally going to play really well against some others. Like if you take a commander who calls in heavy vehicles and your opponent has like got loads of additional AT options, or if you've got elite infantry and they've got like superb anti-infantry in some form, there's always going to be strengths and weaknesses, but that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it like a stone, paper, scissors mind game when it comes to picking commanders.
Yeah, but like, isn't that boring? Because it's like, man, I really want to call this unit in, but I can't do that because he might counter me. Like, I think maybe an extent.
This is what I was saying. This is what I was saying by it doesn't really justify its existence.
Right.
Like, if you just give players access to all of the toys and let them play, like in StarCraft 2, it's a much more natural experience, I think.
Yeah. Well, we've been going for 51 minutes, so I think we'll end it in an hour. An hour is a pretty good length, so we'll keep talking for a few more minutes about that. I mean, the commander system in Company of Heroes 2 is something that we could talk about for a very, very long time. I mean, but I'll just kind of delve into it again. I think one of the issues with Company of Heroes 2 commanders, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like the entire podcast is us talking about things we don't like about Company of Heroes 2, but this kind of seems to be going that way. The fact that, like, if you want to get shock troops, you have to get them, or guards, I think is a better example. If you want to get guard troops, you have to get them at 2 command points. But then you can't go into T-34-85 or ISU. Like, if you don't know which late game call-in you want for the late game, but you have to make a decision at 2 command points to get guards. So, like, it seems really weird that you would have like units that come so early and yet then lock you out of alternatives. I suppose this kind of comes back to the fact that guards are part of the counter system. I mean, they're not completely, but they do have a role to fill in the counter system, and that is kind of giving you the tools that you need. Like if guards were non-doctrinal, for example, that would give Soviets a lot more flexibility in terms of commanders.
What about this? For like commanders that all players could tailor them the way they wanted to. So like
trees.
I've always wanted that.
Yeah, like you had 5 slots.
Yeah.
So you had like in Age of Empires 3, you have that in your home.
Yeah.
You can sort of put in the cards. So like for instance, I would really like for the first command point G43s for my infantry, and then for the the second step is like, because I have a pool of command points, like let's say 25 CP. And then I can buy or drag down all of these tiles that represent a value. So like, okay, I want this, this, and this, and then for my late game, I want to get a Jagdtiger that's 15. So that means I've given up some of the early mid game stuff, but I've been able to choose what I want to work with. And I think you're generally never going to see the exact same things because it would open up a lot more room for each individual player to have their personal style shine through.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. The issue is obviously monetization. Like, they've made a lot of money from DLC commanders.
I don't give a fuck, man. I'd pay £10 to be able to make my own
commander. Yeah.
Well, I
I'm not fucking around.
I would say maybe get people to buy certain abilities. Have that as
rather
DLC.
than the commander.
Totally just each individual or like a pack of abilities, and then you could meld them all together for your own. That would be great because then I'd be like, right, this is Hans commander.
Exactly.
James commander, and then it would all be unique, and you could have your own portrait for it, and then that'd be really.
You could also like it would also make things very interesting because then you'd have like the meta game changing a little bit depending on what we see there. You could say like, well, this is Hans, and Hans is playing Hans trademark commander, and this and this and this are the strengths and weaknesses, and versus this guy's,
Yeah, like if you could choose 3 custom commanders, that'd be really cool. I mean,
it's like in StarCraft. A player has a specific style. Hans has a specific commander and a specific style that corresponds to that commander, so he has synergy between the two.
I feel like Company of Heroes 2 would work so well as a free-to-play game. it already kind of is a free to play game, except it's not free to play.
Except for that money you have to put down.
In terms of like you buy Soviets, and then you can spend all this money on like cosmetics and on commanders and such. I feel like it would probably be beneficial, even monetarily, like overall, just release Soviets, release Wehrmacht as free content. You can have those for free, and then you buy the other factions, you buy the commanders. I mean, or ideally the custom commander thing, or you buy the cosmetics. I feel like there's so many microtransactions that it would be, monetarily an incentive to release, say, Soviets and Wehrmacht as free to play. But then also on a community level, then you have a more active player base, and that helps the game grow. It seems
it'd be like a big thing, because that's like the main the main gripe that many of my friends have. I'm like, hey guys, you should definitely try Company of Heroes. It's a really fun game.
It's like $20.
It looks good.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to pay €20 to get fucking stomped by 50 squads of gods. It's not fun. It doesn't feel worth it.
Going back to the customization of commanders, the Relic isn't alien to that idea, because if you ever play Company Heroes Online, you could go, right, I'm choosing a defensive commander, and then you could customize that defensive commander to your playstyle. I loved that. That was the best thing, and that really brought me back into Company Heroes after I left it. And again, if you allowed this to happen, it would encourage a lot more people to come back to the community, as they could keep sharing ideas of whose commander is better, this kind of thing. And with the current state of commanders, like half of them don't even get used because they're crap. Half of them are broken or whatever. And half of them are just abilities reused in weird ways. So
yeah, like Jaeger infantry is pretty much the exact same as Lightning War, but minus the tiger, and instead it has like a fragmentation strike. Yeah, there's some commanders that are just so similar. Actually, and it's interesting because I believe they were playing around with custom commanders, and like I think there was some leaked documents, and also just the fact that looking at the mod tools, like there's files for custom commanders and such. It looks like they've abandoned the idea, because this was kind of a while ago where this all came out. But yeah, it's a shame, because I feel like it gets to a certain stage where the activity will kind of gradually die off, but then making a game free to play, it will insanely spike in popularity. I mean, look at Team Fortress 2. That game was dying, and all of a sudden, it suddenly spiked up in player base. And I mean, the thing is with free to play, right, is there are so many people that will just never pay for a game ever, either because they're 14-year-olds and don't have income, so they're only going to like play games that are free to play, or that they're only going to pirate games instead. It opens up so much more people, and I feel like it's something that Company Heroes would certainly benefit from.
I think I agree. Free to play.
Sorry, go on.
That's it.
Okay, because League of Legends is like the prime example for like how to market a free-to-play game, because it's completely free. You can get every single hero you want. Like it takes a little bit of time, but like by the time you hit level 30, when that's max levels, because not playing ranked, you'll have enough IP, which is the in-game or like the in-game shop currencies, to buy whatever champion you want to play, and then everything else is just cosmetics, which has zero impact on actual gameplay. And that's that. Then after that, it's just like very straightforward. Now, don't get me wrong, I hate League of Legends, but like the way that they marketed it it's absolutely brilliant. Like
actually,
CS:GO, same thing.
Something about League of Legends kind of dodgy. Like you know what runes are in League of Legends?
Oh yeah, okay. Let's disregard those. I'm talking about like
the idea of it,
the whole market thing, because it's free. I've never spent money on League of Legends. By the way, like I've never spent money, or I spent a little bit maybe to get like one skin, but that doesn't matter. Like the experience is always going to be the same. Like for everyone, and like if Company Heroes went free to play, and then they had this, that hey, do you want to make your own commander? You can personalize it. You can even get your own custom icon, if it's safe for work. So when we load in, they'll see like a little picture of
like their favorite esports team.
Yeah, exactly. Like you'd have a little logo or something.
TSM.
Make the experience more personal.
Yeah. I actually feel like
in
there's
StarCraft, you can even have like a little logo thing. We had the what's his name, like Sinn Fein is like some Irish guy who used to be in the IRA but who's now a politician, and that's like a huge meme in Ireland. And we had that, so whenever we came across Irish players, we'd trigger them.
I
You
feel
know,
like there's a lot of room for really good cosmetics.
yeah.
In Company Heroes,
Game metagaming.
something that Company Heroes 2 doesn't do, which I think would be amazing as far as like cosmetics and items, is they have obviously skins, and I feel like the skins have traditionally been pretty boring, but I think the Warpaint skins have been really interesting now. But I feel like voice acting, like I would make it rain, man. If I could turn my British
yeah.
into Australians, like if it was you reskin and revoice
Yes.
British,
That'd be
and
a
then
good
now
idea.
all of a sudden they're
Yes.
Anzacs, and you could do things like Ostrupen. You can make Ostrupen like Romanian, or you could make Ostrupen like Italian. Like you could have these different little quirks, like make them Czech Republic. Like I'm sure you would have people
Infantry
from
skins, man.
skins
Yeah.
and voice acting, and there's a lot of room for that, I think. And I mean, I don't know about like models, because then you have a lot of issues of clarity and such, but skins and voice acting, I think, is something great, and especially because Company of Heroes has such great voice acting, that there's a lot of funny room for it. Like so in Company of Heroes 1, you had like I think the priest was Canadian, the kangaroo I believe was Australian. Like you had all these quirky different voices. Like and I love how even you could even go further than that. I was gonna say I love how how you have like a Scotsman, you have a Welshman. I think you do even further. You could say like, okay, you can play US, but for $10 you can buy a voice pack where all of your US are from the Southern. You can have all these like redneck sounding like riflemen, or you'll have like Californian. Like I think people would get very kind of patriotic behind that. Like they would want to embrace nationality. Like I think that'd be really cool.
And then maybe put like certain region flags on. For instance, different battalions from your home region. You could have like if you wanted to be like the airborne, you have the 101st Airborne. You'd have the little badge on there.
The Screaming Eagle.
The Screaming Eagle, or the SAS. You could have the SAS thing on some commandos.
Would that become an issue? Because like for me personally, I really like having things historically accurate. So like I would really like to have for like on the banners hanging on like the German strike. I would like a swastika there because it's authentic. And stuff like that. So I don't know. Maybe that would be an issue.
You couldn't play Company of Heroes in Germany if it had swastikas. Like there are some messed up laws.
But then you could only have it region specific, or you could only have it
a German,
your computer only.
Yeah,
right.
give them a German patch. Give them like a German patch that censors that shit. Because like I would really like to have that.
Yeah. I think that has its own can of worms there. But yeah, go on, Mackay.
Well, I mean, like, I don't know. I guess we're probably coming up to the end of time, and I feel like this is kind of my closing thought. But it's like, it's just because it's such a general point that I'm about to make. But this is actually why I love Company of Heroes 2. Like, we've been talking about it for we've just done like kind of a couple of podcasts in a row, so quite a long time. And I think we can all agree that there are elements of the game that are a mess. Like, they are an absolute mess. But whenever I talk about Company of Heroes 2 to people, we always come out feeling like having loads of ideas for RTSs and feeling like just like hyped about RTS in general. So I think Company of Heroes 2, I basically think it's a severely flawed game, but I think anybody who has any exposure to Company of Heroes 2 learns so much about RTSs, and like I really hope that applies to the devs, and I think Company of Heroes 3 could be like so amazing. And like for that reason, I'd still recommend Company of Heroes 2 to anybody, because it just gets you thinking, it gets you passionate about RTSs. I mean, like, yeah, it's a mess, but it makes you just appreciate the genre.
There's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
Sure.
Man can dream, though. I don't think there's going to be a Company of Heroes 3 for as long as I'm alive, because right now it's Dawn of War, which looks terrible, by the way.
It'd be like 2018 or something, but I mean, they always use Dawn of War to like feel out the engine and then release Company of Heroes.
The thing is, as well, to bear in mind, is Sega just recently picked up Relic, so like Sega would want to basically make the most. They want to milk Relic for basically all their IP. Like I don't mean to say that in a bad way. I mean like they paid a lot of money to acquire Relic. Like they wouldn't they wouldn't just like let Dawn of War 3 slip. Let like Relic slip after Dawn of War 3. That they would try and make the most of it. But yeah, I personally think there will be Company of Heroes 3. It'll just take a while, but obviously we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, I think Magpie brings up a really good point there. It's like we've been harping on a lot about the flaws of Company of Heroes, but the core mechanics are so fun. The idea of like taking cover and flanking and using grenades and different weapon profiles. Like I've made a video called Why Company Heroes 2 is Awesome, where I rant for like 20 minutes about why it's awesome and has a lot of views. It has like 170,000 views. Yeah, this is a long time ago.
I actually watched it before we started this podcast today because I was like, wait, why is it great? So
okay.
I did take it.
I mean, it was like
I
one of my
forgot that,
first
yeah.
voiceovers, so it sounded a bit dweeby. But
Nah,
yeah,
don't worry about it.
and the fact that like Company of Heroes has such a beautiful game visually and audioly. I don't know how to word that, but its sound is beautiful, and I feel like audio visually, yeah, I feel like they should be making the most of that in terms of new models, new voice acting and such. Like Dawn of War 2 had some fantastic skins, and they weren't just skins; they were new models. Like I don't know if you guys played that, but you would buy certain chapters. Like you would have Dark Angels, or you would have like not Imperial Fist, but there were like certain like factions, like codexes or whatever they're called, like sub races. That they're the same like gameplay, but they just look really badass. They have new models and such. So yeah, I think Company Heroes 2, if it went free to play, it doesn't even have to be super crazy hardcore, like rotating commanders. Just make Soviets and Wehrmacht free. Like how many people are buying Soviets and Wehrmacht compared to the entire DLC, the entirety of the commanders and the factions?
I think it'd be a good idea. Make it
I
free
agree.
to play.
So
Get more people
I
in the
guess
game.
like the end moral is to put Hans and Callum on the relic
Absolutely.
design team. Let's do it.
I'm totally sold on that.
We'll crowdfund it.
The thing though is that even way back before even Company Heroes 2 came out, we were telling them these ideas and stuff. Like for instance, observer mode.
Oh,
We set up a grow. It was years, like 2 years after the game released, we finally got observer mode. It was ridiculous how long it's taken to get these things and to get where we are now. So we have all these great ideas, but Relic, I don't know that they have we have to understand they're a company. They have to they can't choose everything, right? But some of these ideas like the custom commanders. Making it free to play and making all the DLC for the skins and stuff just make so much sense. I'm just baffled why they won't do these no-brainer ideas, right?
Well, that's why I wanted to make the argument that like making the game free to play would benefit them monetarily as well. Like it's important to make suggestions that obviously like Relic should make the
base cost for just microtransactions, and there you have it.
Yeah. Like it's easy to say like they should just make the game free and do all these things that cost lots of money, but you have to be realistic about it. And I think custom commanders where you buy money is realistic. But the problem is though is that kind of creates its own shitstorm of like, well, I just paid like $10 for this commander and now it's worthless because I can make my own. So they kind of have they're kind of stuck in this commander system, just because they
could just give everybody the abilities. If you've bought all these commanders,
that's true.
ability and the commander, you just give them automatically, and then any new abilities that come out, then they have to pay for. So they could kind of get around it, and then they might be able to be like, right, just to, as a goodwill gesture, the next 10 abilities are free.
It's interesting because Relic in some ways have been very flexible, and in some ways they've actually done some really admirable things, such as like they've removed deep snow and blizzards and cold tech, and that was something that was so fundamental to the marketing of Company of Heroes 2. It was like a big press release is that like deep snow, blizzards, general winter. It was a bit like all these marketing buzzwords, and it was horrible for gameplay. Everyone hated it, and Relic, they swallowed their pride and they go, yeah, you know what, cold tech sucks. Let's remove it. And there's other examples where they've done things like that. I mean, I can't think of the top of my head, but there are definitely some examples of where they have redesigned, like OKW, they kind of redesigned them a little bit in terms of, like the way that units work and such. So that in some ways they are actually very flexible and they do take the feedback on board. In other ways, not so much. In other ways, they're very inflexible. Like, for example, Abandon still exists. There's a lot of things like that that everyone hates, but it's still in the game. But... Anyway, closing thoughts, your summary, Tenchi?
Yeah, I think that just brought to light the things of like ideas for like what we could do to improve the game. I really like those, but Relic being Relic, I don't really have a lot of high hope for them, which is kind of depressing. But more than anything, like I think Magpie made a good point. Company of Heroes is very enjoyable, but it has its flaws, and it's sad for me because that's what's holding me back from being able to enjoy the game as much as I think I could.
All right, I'm not sure if that counted as your summary, Hans. Was that your summary earlier?
What?
Like, have you already outroed like before? I think
You got to submit your conclusion, bro.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you already did or not.
I probably have.
Okay, that's fine then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this was actually a lot of fun. I think, given that this was our first attempt at podcasting, I think we kind of worked out that it's more fun if we just rant away and not worry too much about specific subjects and specific topics. But yeah, thanks a lot for joining me, guys. It's actually been a lot of fun. I am very passionate about RTS games and discussing them. Getting some ideas out is definitely always a fun time. So we'll end this video here. Thanks for watching to everyone that did, and make sure you follow these wonderful gentlemen at their Twitter. I'm definitely keen to do more podcasts. I'm not sure if we're going to have like the same guests or maybe some different people on. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us. It's been cool.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very
thanks,
interesting talking about it.